I'll start with the welcome. Thank you. We would like to welcome you to our August council meeting. As the meeting chair, I give my consent for this open council meeting to be streamed live, recorded and published online. Anyone who is invited to read out a question or a presentation will be recorded, and their voice, image and comments will form part of the live stream and recording. The Chair and/or the CEO have the discretion and authority at any time to direct the termination or interruption of live streaming. Such direction will only be given in exceptional circumstances where deemed relevant. Circumstances may include instances where the content of debate is considered misleading, defamatory, or potentially inappropriate to be published. The stream will stop prior to the closed section of the meeting and will recommence for the conclusion of the meeting. The public is able to view this live stream via our website at www.pyrenees.vic.gov.au. Should technical issues prevent the continuation of the stream, a recording will be made available on our website. I will now ask you to pause for our opening prayer. Heavenly Father, we ask you to give your blessing to this council, direct and prosper its deliberations to the advancement of your glory and the true welfare of the people of the Pyrenees Shire. Amen. Pyrenees Shire Council acknowledge the people past and present of the Wadawurrung, Dja-Dja-Wurrung, Dja-Wurrung and Wotjobaluk tribes, whose land forms the Pyrenees Shire. We pay our respect to the customs, traditions and stewardship of the land by the elders and people of these tribes. We'll now move on to apologies, and I believe we're all present, so there being none, we will now move on to notices of disclosure of interest by councillors and officers. I open that. Does anyone have a disclosure this evening on any of the agenda items? There being none, we'll move on to the confirmation of the previous minutes for the ordinary meeting of council held on the 21st of July and the closed meeting of council held on the 21st of July 2020. Do I have someone to move those, please? Thank you. Clark, seconded. Councillor Vance. All those in favour of those minutes, confirming those minutes, and that's carried. Any business arising from those? Thank you. The next part of our meeting is the public participation. Unfortunately, as we're meeting quite differently this evening, there are no members of the public present, but also we have not received any submissions, so we will now move on to our items for noting. So our first, our items of noting, if you're following on the agenda, move from page 5 through to page 23. And having taken them as read, do I have a councillor please happy to move those items for noting? And Councillor Vance. Seconded, sorry, Councillor Eason, I think that was. And all those in favour of those items for noting? And they're passed, thank you. Is there any business arising from those items of noting? Beautiful, thank you. So we move on to item 13, our first item for decision, 13.1, which is the planning permit, PA 2964/20, and I will hand please to our manager, our director, Doug, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide council with information that is relevant to making a determination on a planning permit application for a 3-lot subdivision at 25 Macintosh Lane, Snake Valley. The 7.8 hectare site is proposed to be subdivided into 3 lots, and they've been shown on the plans that form the agenda. And they effectively have the sizes of lot 1 being just over 4 hectares, lot 2 1.7 hectares, and lot 3 being just over 2.2 hectares. The current use of the land is for rural residential, and there is an existing dwelling and numerous outbuildings on the site. And there is maps contained within the report that show the locality of that site. All lots adjoining the subject lot are zoned for rural living, with the exception of 1 lot to the southeast, which is zoned farming, and the bushfire management overlay affects all surrounding properties. Lots within the rural living zone average 7.5 hectares, except for the 19 lot subdivision to the west of the subject site, where the lots average 2.5 hectares. Notice was sent to adjoining landowners, and public notice was also provided through Council's website, and 2 submissions were received. The application was subject to an internal referral to Council's Environmental Health Department, who did not oppose the proposed subdivision, subject to conditions. And it was also referred to the Country Fire Authority, Central Highlands Water and Power Corps under Section 55 of the Planning Environment Act, who have provided conditional consent to the granting of a planning permit. The first objection had some concerns with the proposed development around access, built amenity, and noise associated with use. The second objection also had some concerns around noise and disturbance, traffic impact, the rural living nature of the surrounding land, air pollution, impact on rates, and impact on privacy. In response, the assessing officer advised in relation to each of those points about traffic impacts. Any additional traffic associated with the proposed subdivision is not expected to impact on the condition or safety of the existing road network. In terms of the potential development of the site, the application before Council is for a 3-lot subdivision with no specific development proposal at the subject site. As such, the design features of any future development cannot be considered in the context of this application. The use of motorbikes and noise impacts. The application does not propose the use or development of land for the purposes of motorbike riding. Noise and air pollution. The application before Council is for a 3-lot subdivision with no specific development proposed. And in terms of subdivision design in the rural living zone, the rural living zone provides for the subdivision of lots to a minimum lot size of 2 hectares. A permit may also be granted to create lots smaller than 2 hectares in some circumstances. And in relation to this particular circumstance, the provision is that the number of lots is no more than the number that land could be subdivided into in accordance with a schedule to this zone. The subject site is 7.8 hectares or just over, and can accommodate the further subdivision of the lots in accordance with the zone. Given the surrounding subdivision pattern of the locality, this proposed subdivision is not disproportionate to that of surrounding lots. In relation to rates, the provision of rates is not a matter relevant to the Pyrenees planning scheme. And in terms of privacy is not a planning consideration in the context of this application. Officers have gone through all the planning considerations and they're before Council within the report. The proposed subdivision allows for suitably located rural residential growth, particularly within the rural living zone of Snake Valley. The application has satisfactorily demonstrated to attempt to minimise any environmental impacts by adjusting the boundary alignments of the proposed lots and deliberately siting the proposed building envelopes and on-site effluent disposal areas to minimise the impact of nutrient loads on waterways and native vegetation. The proposed lots are serviced by an existing road network and are considered to be capable of accommodating future developments. The creation of the lots and residential density that they would allow is in keeping with the adjoining subdivision and supported via the scheme. The objections made against the application have been assessed against the scheme and are not considered to provide a sufficient basis to refuse the application. Therefore, it is the officer recommendation that Council, having considered all the matters required under Section 60 of the Planning Environment Act 1987 and the provisions of the Pyrenees Planning Scheme, determines to issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit under the provisions of the Pyrenees Planning Scheme for a 3-lot subdivision at 25 Macintosh Lane, Snake Valley, subject to a whole range of conditions that include environmental health, power call conditions, fire authority conditions, access conditions, and native vegetation conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Douglas Gowans. I will now ask a councillor who is happy to move that recommendation. And I'll look for hands. Oh, yes, Councillor Clark. A councillor happy to second it, Councillor Ferrari. Thank you. Would you like to speak to that, Councillor Clark, to that recommendation?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If I could just ask a question first to Mr. Gowans, just to confirm again, Mr. Gowans, that the size of the 1.76 lot, although it is smaller than the recommended 2, you certainly feel it's fine given that, and the thing that there is certainly capacity to deal with the wastewater. That I think you've said both those things, but just to confirm those, please.
Through you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councillor, for your question. That's correct. The siting and subdivision of the lots has taken into account the environmental aspects of the land and has considered effluent disposal, and there is provision within that, within the proposed subdivision. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I visited the site on Saturday and had a look. It's a nice piece of rolling open land with a little bit of vegetation on it. It very much fits with what Snake Valley is in the sense of developing into a really nice rural living area, and I would certainly believe it's well worth supporting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Ferrari, would you like to speak to that recommendation?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just note that the report's quite extensive, so I'm very pleased that it's been given the relevant considerations by the officers concerned. Just one question. I note there's a range of objections. Do we know actually how many objectors that were submitted an objection? So
through you, Madam Mayor, thank you, Councillor. My understanding is that there was just the two objections, and they were effectively from the households at those localities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferrari and Mr. Gowans. I'll now open up to any other discussion. Were there other councillors wishing to comment? No, that being the case, we'll put that recommendation to the vote. All those in favour of the recommendation, please raise your hands. And that is carried. Thank you very much. We will now move on to item 13.2, and that's the Upper Mount Emu Flood Investigation Report. Again, I hand to Mr. Douglas Gowans. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is to seek Council's endorsement of the Upper Mount Emu Creek Regional Flood Investigation and to obtain Council approval to seek authorisation from the Minister of Planning to prepare and exhibit a planning scheme amendment to implement findings of the investigation. The project area along Mount Emu Creek from extends from Langi Kalkal, just north of Trawalla, to the south of Skipton, and includes Bailey Creek, which is the creek that comes from Lake Barrenbeet and joins Mount Emu Creek. The project included a reference group which was set up where representatives were invited to provide feedback and comment on the project throughout its development. The investigation provides clear implications of flood events on the town of Skipton, but the focus of this report is on the implications of the flood events and impacts on Pyrenees Shire land within the Pyrenees Shire. The outcomes of the report include the preparation of some draft planning overlays, which have been produced for the model 1 in 100 year or 1% annual exceedance probability. And I'll term that as I'm reading the report as the AEP percentage. The investigation recommends that this be identified through land subject to inundation overlays and floodway overlays in the Pyrenees planning scheme. The flood study also helps the Shire when it comes to emergency response, and roads and buildings for each of the modelled flood events have been identified and mapped. For the 1% AEP flood events, 3 dwellings were identified as prone to overflow flooding in the Trawalla area. Also, 74 buildings were identified as prone to overflow flooding at the Lake Goldsmith Steam Preservation Site, which has experienced flooding in the past. The investigation has also produced several tools that can be used for emergency response and education. These tools will help and be included in the Municipal Flood Emergency Plan. There was also some investigation of flood warning, and the focus of the flood warning was to establish an official flood warning system for Skipton. These would predominantly be rain gauges, and they would be predominantly within the Pyrenees Shire, because the rain events in Pyrenees Shire are what effectively flows into Mount Emu Creek and eventually down to Skipton. In terms of mitigation options, the extent and effect of flooding on the Mount Emu Creek floodplain is broadly known and understood by the farming community in the area. The investigation undertaken solidifies the understanding while also providing a key reference document for future planning scheme amendments and future investment on community infrastructure. Potential mitigation measures to alleviate flood at the Lake Goldsmith Steam Rally site were also assessed. The construction of a levee was found to be a cost-effective solution to prevent impacts from flooding. The estimated cost of the levee was just over $700,000. The investigation also helps guide decisions regarding future development and land use at their site. The investigation has identified clearly flood event extent and impact on the upper Mount Emu Creek catchment. It has also recommended reviewing the potential for updating the Pyrenees planning scheme to add to the floodway overlay and land subject to inundation overlay. Therefore, it's the officer's recommendation that Council endorse the planning control recommendations as outlined in the Upper Mount Emu Creek Regional Flood Investigation, endorses the identified flood mitigation measures as outlined in the Upper Mount Emu Creek Regional Flood Investigation as possible options for implementation through external funding, seeks authorisation from the Minister for Planning under Section 8A of the Planning and Environment Act 1987 to prepare a planning scheme amendment to incorporate into the Pyrenees planning scheme the recommended land subject to inundation overlay and floodway overlay. And following receipt of authorisation from the Minister for Planning, prepares the planning scheme amendment in accordance with Section 12 of the Planning and Environment Act 1987 and exhibits that amendment under Sections 17, 18 and 19 of the Act.
Thank you, Mr. Gowans. Do I have a councillor, please, willing to move that recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Eason. Seconded, Councillor Clark. Councillor Eason, would you like to speak to that recommendation?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The work that goes into these flood studies and the outcomes that help us as a shire and adjoining shires to understand where the water goes, what events it can create, having fallen on Pyrenees land, is amazing. I'm going through one at the moment in Avoca, and it's opened my eyes to how this information helps other shires as well as our own. And I recommend the report.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. Councillor Clark, would you like to speak to the recommendation?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I fully endorse the recommendation and the detailed work that's done. Although the study isn't about Skipton, it's absolutely integral to Skipton's future that this work has been done, and it's really, really good in that context. There's probably, I think, 3 things that have come to my mind in reading the reports. The first one, I think, is Lake Goldsmith, we definitely have to act, and the levy does seem like a really appropriate option in that sense. The second one is that there is an offtake channel to Lake Goldsmith, and the report addresses that quite comprehensively. although I would urge the officers just to talk a little bit more with Glenelg Cochrane CMA. I think we could actually represent that detail a little better in the key document, which is the major report in that sense of things. But beyond that, I think it's a really good document. Oh, the third one, Madam Mayor, was I understand that we are actively looking at the entrance road to the Langi Kalkal prison, and this report talks about that. Mr. Gowans, I'm sure we've taken that into consideration in our planning for the rebuild of that road.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Clark, for your query there. As you'd be aware, last year, Council invested in a section of the Langi Kalkal Road that had some trees that adjoined the road, which were removed, and the road was rehabilitated. And in fact, the road in the low points in that section was raised by approximately 150 mils from its current level. So that will assist. However, there is a section of the Langi Kalkal Road that's yet to be undertaken, and Council will be looking at that later in this Council meeting. There is a low point on the southern side of the Langi Kalkal road, south side of the railway line, and the design plans are proposing to increase the height of the low point of that road by approximately 280 millimetres, which will assist in some of the lower level flood event scenarios.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's all from me.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Thank you, Mr. Gowans, too. Other councillors that wish to speak to this item? Thank you. Councillor Vance.
Yeah, just to endorse the previous remarks, Madam Mayor. Having had experience in the past, these studies are vital in letting people know what to expect and giving them pre-warning, especially for the landowners if they've got to move stock, and especially in that case of having to move stock. It's a great tool that can be utilised very well, I believe.
And I can second that as a landowner sitting in the middle of that floodplain and being flooded in one side in the last event. But that's very valid. Thank you, Councillor Vance. Any other councillors? Councillor Ferrari? You happy? No? Brilliant. Well, in that case, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? And that's carried. Thank you very much. And we do thank all the officer and the team that's put all this together, the outside personnel and that from council that have put so much effort in. It really has been very comprehensive. We'll now move to item 13.3, which is the Raglan flood investigation. And again, I'll hand over to Mr. Douglas Gowans. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is to seek council endorsement for the Raglan flood investigation and to obtain council approval to seek authorisation from the Minister for Planning to prepare and exhibit a planning scheme amendment to implement findings of the investigation. The project area for this particular flood study extends along Fiery Creek, approximately 3 kilometres upstream of Raglan, down to the Western Highway, which is approximately 6 kilometres south of Raglan. It also incorporates each of the major tributaries draining through Raglan into Fiery Creek. Again, a project reference group was set up where representatives were invited to provide feedback and comment on the project through its development. Community consultation was carried out during the 3 stages of the project. The investigation provides clear implications of flood events on Raglan, and particularly the residential properties within the township. Several outputs from this investigation provide valuable information to improve flood readiness. Events up to the 1% AEP flood event have been modelled through this study to show that no properties would experience, or no current properties would experience above floor flooding. However, when you get beyond the 1 in 100 year flood, the number of properties in a 0.2% AEP flood, which is effectively a 1 in 500 year flood, would potentially have 4 properties in the existing situation that would have flooding above floor level. And then in an even bigger flood, there'd be up to 19 properties with above floor flooding with the maximum flood event. There were a number of structural mitigation options investigated. Each was assessed to determine the relative and actual viability of each option. It was concluded that none of the structural mitigation options were viable. However, the planning overlays that can be produced from this flood study do have the benefit of identifying particular areas within and around the township of Raglan that are affected by flooding. And these have been mapped and recommended for inclusion in the Pyrenees planning scheme. And by including these areas, this will prevent inappropriate development and potentially save people from future flooding. These overlays will assist local government, the Catchment Management Authority and the community in carrying out effective planning and management of flood-prone land within Raglan. Other mitigation options included community education and simplified flood warning systems. These were identified in the report. These options were assessed as more cost-effective and likely to have a broader reach in the community compared with the structural mitigation options. And a couple of these mitigation options included flood depth indicators and also rain gauges to assist in understanding how much rainfall and what the impact would be. The investigation has also produced several tools that can be used for emergency response and education. These tools will be included in the Municipal Flood Emergency Plan. The investigation has identified flood event extent and impact on the Raglan catchment. It's concluded that the investigation provides sufficient evidence to support a planning scheme amendment and that non-structural mitigation measures be noted and supported for inclusion in the Municipal Flood Emergency Plan. Therefore, it's the officer's recommendation that Council endorse the Raglan Flood Investigation Report, seek authorisation from the Minister for Planning to prepare a planning scheme amendment to incorporate into the Pyrenees planning scheme for land subject to inundation overlays and floodway overlays. And following receipt of the authorisation from the Minister of Planning, prepare a planning scheme amendment and exhibit that amendment under the appropriate sections of the Act.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Gowans. I will now, may a councillor please move that recommendation? Just looking for hands up. Thank you, Councillor Clark. Seconded, Councillor Eason. Councillor Clark, would you like to speak to that recommendation?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just two things quickly to add. It's very pleasant to do a flood investigation and find out there really aren't any properties affected in the normal course of events. That's a very reassuring thing for council. And that's effectively why there are options there for mitigation, but there really is nothing that's cost effective to mitigate in the current environment. However, as Mr. Gowans says, it's really important that we do some future planning and make sure that we don't get properties built in inappropriate places, hence the recommendation, which I'm happy to support.
Thank you. Well said there. Would you like to speak to that, Councillor Eason?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a question of Mr. Gowans. I'm really intrigued with this rain gauge option. Is it self-emptying or has someone actually got to go out there and empty it after each rain event?
Through you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councillor, for your question. These gauges would be electronic gauges, and ideally these would be gauges that would even be part of a public network, and so they would be fully self-emptying. The real benefit, though, is in the information through further flood event scenarios, is if these gauges are in place, they can assist with working out if there's a certain amount of rain within a certain time period, whether that's going to have a flood impact on the town of Raglan. So it's really providing information to the community to decide for themselves based on the tools that are there, whether they're going to be impacted or not. So it really is about providing greater community education and empowering the community to understand what a particular rain event might do, and then people can respond individually.
Thank you for that.
Mr. Gowan.
Beautiful. Thank you, Councillor Eason. Other councillors that wish to speak on this item? Councillor Vance and then Councillor Ferrari.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The extra benefit of the rain gauge is that it gives farmers downstream plenty of notice to know that there's a flood on its way. If you've got, it may well be that at Caramballick or further downstream, no rain at all, but a quick 2.5 or 3 inches up in the upper catchment can certainly create a flood. And if you've got that forewarning, it's a wonderful tool.
Education is awesome, isn't it, in that pre-planning. Councillor Ferrari.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, it's such a great piece of work, and they're very important projects that provide valuable reference documents, particularly in an emergency management perspective. It's also a valuable tool for planning and ensuring infrastructure is protected, and they provide a very valuable reference point for any future planning. So we've got a good map of what we're doing now. So any future planning, we don't have to start at the beginning. We've already done a lot of work. So all in all, both really good documents.
Absolutely second that. Were there any other comments? Then I will put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? And that's carried. Thank you again to all the work that's been put into this document as well. And again, there has been some encouraging information that's come out of that, as Councillor Clark alluded to, but even more importantly, that knowledge that is so vital in us protecting our people and our businesses, in particular our agricultural industry. So thank you all. That brings us to item 13.4, which is the Local Roads and Community Infrastructure Program. Again, Mr. Douglas Gowans, will hand to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is to seek further direction from Council about the projects to be funded under the Local Roads and Community Infrastructure Program. As Council would be aware, you considered a report at the July Council meeting regarding the allocation of almost $1.4 million that's been made available by the federal government for the Local Roads and Community Infrastructure Program. Council resolved to endorse a number of projects, and I'll just read through those projects. The largest contribution was to the Lexington Community Hub. There was some roadworks improvements at the Snake Valley intersection. There was some footpath work to be done in Avoca, Beaufort and Snake Valley. And there was also some swimming pool improvements to be done across the Shire at the 3 public swimming pools. Following the council meeting, officers submitted the projects as listed and received some initial feedback from the funding body that projects that had already received Commonwealth funding were likely to be ineligible. Unfortunately, this meant that the Lexington Community Hub project, which was already in receipt of Commonwealth funding, is potentially ineligible. Now, I do say the word potentially. The assessments are still yet to be fully carried out, and there is some discretion from the funding body to look at projects. But based on the initial feedback, council officers are of the view that it would be prudent to exchange the projects as soon as possible. At its July council meeting, council also considered a number of other potential projects that could be eligible under this fund, and they're listed in the report, including a public lighting project and some road, as alluded to earlier in the meeting, some major roadworks at the Langy Calcal Road. Therefore, if the Lexington Hub project money needs to be reallocated, there's potentially $684,921 to reallocate. Now, council did in a previous report also look at some principles behind what projects should be being considered for this particular fund. And it's fair to say that council has quite a number of community projects on its books at the moment. And, one of the considerations is how deliverable are the projects that council might replace. Can we have them fully delivered by 30th of June 2021? So there's a number of options in the report. And one of the options, as well as the Langy-Calcal Road, has been the Chepstow-Streatham Road rehabilitation project. There's potentially some sections of that road that are really in need of some work that have only recently come to light. And it's based on the deliverability of these particular projects and the fact that these weren't in council's previous budget, that council potentially, and the officer recommendation is that council, in the event of that Lexington Community Hub is ineligible under this program, that council nominates the following projects for inclusion under the Local Roads and Community Infrastructure Program. The Langy-Calcal Road for $350,000 and the Chepstow-Streatham Road rehabilitation for $334,921.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Gowans, and explaining those parameters, because that does give us some direction where to go there. So thank you. So may I ask a councillor willing to move that recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Vance. Seconded, Councillor Ferrari. Councillor Vance, would you like to speak to that recommendation for that program?
We're probably, our hands being forced a little bit here with the not knowing about whether Lexington is going to qualify or not, but certainly it's been brought to my attention, especially that the Chepstow-Streatham Road is one that is going to need quite a deal of money spent onto it into the future. So this is a way forward, as I see it. So I'm quite happy with the officer's recommendation, Madam Mayor.
Very valid comments. Thank you, Councillor Vance. Councillor Ferrari, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just think it's good to see that we're getting ready on the outcome of what's going to happen at Lexington. And if it's a no, that we've got other projects ready to go. So I think that's good to see that flexibility and that adaptability within the council to redirect those funds if that's what ends up happening. So that's really pleasing. We're not wasting time. We're getting on with another job with the money if that's what happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferrari. Other councillors that wish to discuss the item? No. On that note then, I'll put that recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? And that's carried. Thank you very much. And thank you for the efforts put in there to be able to utilise a project like that. We now move on to item 13.5 and we move into corporate and community services, and we're looking at the item of outstanding rates and charges, and I will hand over to Ms Cathy Bramwell. Thank you to report on this.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is to outline the level of rates and charges currently outstanding and ask council to consider rescinding the previous suspension on all legal action in response to COVID-19 in certain circumstances. In order to provide good financial governance, council is required to actively pursue long overdue rate accounts in order for it not to lead to an increase in long-term debtors and a corresponding reduction in cash available to meet council's operating requirements. As at the 31st of July 2020, an amount of just over almost $501,000 for rates and charges was classified as being payable to council. This represents 4.43% of the amount due in the 2019-20 financial year. Ratepayers have the option to pay by 4 instalments or in full by February, and the report does detail the process that people go through, that our staff go through if full payment is not received by February. In line with council's response to COVID-19, legal action was suspended on all accounts with the debt collection agencies. and an alternative collection procedure was taken in response to the impact of COVID-19 on the community. Officers were proactive and reached out to ratepayers in a non-threatening manner, and in an effort to give council a more strategic perspective on the possession of their individual ratepayers to assess eligibility for hardship. In regular circumstances, council would have proceeded with legal action on these accounts in April. However, due to the uncertainty of the impact of COVID-19, the action was not taken, and was agreed with council that we wouldn't take any action. Normally, that legal action would be part of just normal administrative processes taken under delegation by the Property Revenue Officer. Of the outstanding amount, just over $178,000 remains outstanding, and council and its debt collection agency have not been successful in arranging payment for the arrears. It is suggested, therefore, that council officers be allowed to proceed with existing and new legal action on properties that have 2 or more years outstanding, in order to ensure that council continue to collect the outstanding revenue, where there is no existing arrangement or hardship known about. It should be noted that as these are 2 years or more in arrears, that there is no suggestion that these are currently in hardship because of COVID reasons, which was the purpose for rescinding the legal action previously. Where there is any indication through this process that the ratepayer is in hardship due to COVID-19 or any other circumstance, all action will be terminated and the outstanding amount will be dealt with in accordance with their council's hardship policy. The officer's recommendation, therefore, is that council receives the outstanding rates and charges report as at 31st of July 2020, amends a previous decision to cease all legal action on outstanding debts in response to the impact of COVID-19 on the community to incorporate the next item, and agrees to allow officers to commence or continue existing legal action where an assessment has been 2 or more years of rates and charges outstanding and there is no indication of hardship.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms Bramwell. Do I have a councillor, please, willing to move that recommendation? And Councillor Eason, thank you. Seconded, Councillor Clark. Councillor Eason, would you like to speak to that item?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I feel it's appropriate, as these are 2 years old or longer, and if the people concerned do show some hardship currently, either because of COVID-19 or whatever, we will be able to deal with it appropriately. But I think anything that's 2 years old needs to be followed up with legal action if necessary.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. Councillor Clark, did you want to speak to that item?
Yes, Madam Mayor, just simply to say that I would concur with Councillor Eason. I think we do need to follow up. These are quite significant amounts in their individual assessments. So I think in that sense, council needs to act in this sense. I just have one question, please, for Ms Bramwell. When will council next get a report as to the progress of this, please?
Thank you, Councillor Clark. The next report will not be in time for September, but will be after the election, so probably November or December.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll open to any other questions or discussion. Councillor Vance and then Councillor Ferrari.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess everybody has their reasons. Some are valid and some aren't. But the necessary thing for ratepayers to understand is please talk to the staff and let them know. Don't think it'll go away and just ignore it, because it can't go away. Eventually, something's got to happen. To avoid unpleasantness, it's always wise to talk. That's all I wish to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. Councillor Ferrari.
No, I should have gone first because Councillor Vance stole me thunder. But look, I just reiterate what Councillor Vance said, and I just urge the ratepayers to contact council at their earliest opportunity if they're experiencing any difficulties or hardships, and work something out. The people in the rates department are very, very good, and they're very understanding. And if that early contact's made, I'd suggest on most occasions that some sort of suitable arrangement could be forthcoming.
Wise words and wise words to be repeated. So we do want to be able to support our ratepayers as best as we can. So thank you all on that. If there aren't any more comments or discussion on that, we will put that recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? And that's carried. Thank you. We now move on to item 13.6, and this is the Community Asset Committee delegations for the year 2020. Again, I'll hand to Ms. Cathy Bramwell. Thank you again.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is for Council to formally establish and adopt instruments of delegations for its Community Asset Committees in accordance with the Local Government Act 2020. The Act allows Council to establish community asset committees and appoint members to those committees as necessary to enable a committee to manage a community asset within the municipal district on behalf of Council. These actually replace the Section 86 committees under the former Local Government Act 1989, which that section is now repealed. And the Act also allows a delegation of any power, duty or function of the Council to the members of that Community Asset Committee. And there is a list of the kind of delegations that that must be included. Council has 5 former Section 86 committees, now known as Community Asset Committees, which is proposed to be established under the Act as Community Asset Committees. And they are the Beaufort Community Bank Complex, Brewster Hall, Landsborough Community Precinct, Snake Valley Hall, and the Warburg Community Hub. Draft instruments of delegation are attached for each committee for Council adoption as part of the establishment of these committees. And Council is also requested to formalise appointments to the Community Asset Committees as listed within the body of the report. And it should be noted that the councillors' names within there have been removed as they attend these committees as observers only. The officer recommendation is that Council establishes 5 community asset committees to manage the follow community assets on its behalf, and they are listed in the recommendation as previously stated. Formally appoints the community representative listed within the recommendation that the community asset committees. I won't read them all because they're fairly lengthy. And adopts the attached instruments of delegation with or without amendment for each of the community asset committees established under Section 65 of the Local Government Act 2020 as attached to this report, and requires, in accordance with Section 47(6) of the Local Government Act 2020, Council officers to appropriately guide and monitor activities of the community asset committees established under Section 65 of the Act, and report annually on committee activities to Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Ms. Bramwell. I will now call on a councillor who's happy to move that recommendation or speak to that recommendation. Councillor Clark. And a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Ferrari. Councillor Clark, would you like to speak to that?
Madam Mayor, very simply just to say these are important functional arms of council in terms of dealing with local community assets, which is a really terrific thing, and thank the council officers for the work they've done in preparing these. As per our discussion, there have been a couple of major changes and they've been taken on board, so I'm very happy that the reports be moved as they are.
Yes.
I just have one minor change, if we could please. Under the Brewster Committee, it says Annie Morecambe. If we could make that Anne Morecambe, I think she would be much happier. And other than that, that's all good. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
So if I know Jane will have that altered on the recommendation. Any other comments on that from other councillors, please? No. That being the case, we will put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? and that's carried. Thank you all for that. And we thank all those committees who do so much work to maintain those community hubs and places of meeting. We're very thankful for that, and it makes our community what it is. We're now up to item 13.7. So this is the delegations update. And again, I will hand over to Ms. Kathy Bramwell. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is for Council to review and adopt updated delegations in accordance with the Local Government Act 2020. The Act requires Council to review its delegations, appointments and authorisations. These are the instruments that delegate duties from Council to the CEO, to other staff, and to create authorised officers under various acts. Council is required to review these by the 1st of September 2020 and within 12 months of a general election. In accordance with the Act, Council delegations currently in force have been reviewed and updated as follows. So, as I've previously said, there are 4 different instruments of delegation. Advice from Maddox in 2019 indicated also that the individual Section 11 and Section 11A instruments of appointments, which authorise officers to undertake certain duties and powers under various acts, be done for individual officers also, because this is considered best practice and allows for separate officers to provide original delegation documents in evidence where they are legally required, which is difficult if 2 officers have to provide evidence in different forums at the same time, if you've only got one document. So the PDF has been provided by Council for consideration, but the original documents will be signed and sealed separately. Changes to individual documents are largely non-material from the last updates, primarily administrative and formatting changes. However, 2 key areas of change are included. That is the transition from the Local Government Act 1989 to 2020, largely just terminology changes, and transition from the Emergency Management Act 1986 to the Emergency Management Act 2013 on or before the 1st of December 2020. And the key changes in the Emergency Management Act transition is the mandatory authorisation of 2 new officer roles, which is the Municipal Emergency Management Officer, or the MIMO for short, and the Municipal Recovery Manager. Those roles, the Recovery Manager was also always part of Council's emergency management leadership, but was previously not mandated, and the MIMO is an amalgamation of the old Municipal Emergency Manager and the resourcing officers' roles. Other delegations are under review. The delegations and sub-delegations from the CEO to staff and from the municipal building surveyor to other staff, they're also under review and will be authorised on or before the 1st of September, but those documents do not need a council resolution or implementation through the council seal. And a further report will come to council detailing those changes that were made just for information. That'll come through in September. So the officer's recommendation is, in the exercise of the powers conferred by the Local Government Act 2020 and other legislation referred to in the attached instruments of delegation and instruments of appointment and authorisation, it is recommended that Council resolves that there be delegated to the members of Council staff holding, acting in or performing the duties of the offices or positions referred to in the following instruments, the powers, duties and functions set out in those instruments, subject to the conditions and limitations specified. And that is the Section 5 Instrument of Delegation to the Chief Executive Officer, the S6 Instrument of Delegation to members of Council staff, S11 Instrument of Appointment and Authorisation to authorised officers, and S11A, the Instrument of Appointment and Authorisation for matters under the Planning and Environment Act 1987, and individual instruments of appointment and authorisation for individual officers under both S11 and S11A. That each of the instruments listed above comes into force immediately. The common seal of Council is affixed to the individual instrument and remains in force until Council determines to vary or revoke them. On the coming into force of the instruments, all previous delegations and appointments authorisations by Council will be revoked. The duties and functions set out in each instrument must be performed, and the powers set out in the instruments must be executed in accordance with any guidelines or policies of Council that it may from time to time adopt. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramwell. May I ask a councillor to move that recommendation? And Councillor Ferrari's moved that, and a councillor seconded Councillor Eason. Thank you so much. Councillor Ferrari, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, it's an important responsibility for that delegation in that the delegations are made to share the management responsibilities, so it's not left to one person. It's important that the people that have these delegated responsibilities understand their roles and responsibilities, and if done properly, which I think we've seen it done pretty well here at Pyrenees, it prevents a one point of contact failure by others having knowledge of the roles and responsibilities of others. So if it's left to one person, it can be a risk. If some of those responsibilities are shared and other people have knowledge of the roles, we haven't got a one point contact failure. So that's a really good, it's a really important document.
Thank you, Councillor Ferrari. Very apt words. Councillor Eason, would you like to speak to that? Any other councillors would like to comment or discuss any parts of that item? Then we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour, please raise your hands. And that's carried. Thank you. We're now up to item 13.8. So this is the adoption of the 2020 governance rules and supporting documents. And again, I will hand to Ms Cathy Bramwell. Thank you again.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report, as you just said, is for Council to adopt the governance rules and supporting documents making up the governance framework. The Local Government Act 2020 requires Council to adopt a range of governance documents by the 1st of September 2020, including the governance rules, and as part of the governance rules, Council's election period policy, the public transparency policy, and a council expenses policy. And the council's election period policy has to form part of the governance rules, and this was attached as an attachment, as actually attachment A. So it remains the same as the policy that was adopted by council previously in December 2019, but now forms part of the governance rules. Governance rules replace meeting rules currently provided as part of local law number 1, and this local law will be amended in preparation for consideration immediately following the general election, as there is a lot of community consultation involved. To complete this tranche of Council's governance framework, although not required by the Act, a procedure for assigning councillors as representatives to committees has also been drafted as part of the suite of documents for Council's consideration and adoption. So in the exercise of the powers conferred by the Local Government Act 2020 and other legislation referred to, oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong, sorry, wrong report. I turned the wrong page. My apologies. As part of the requirements in developing its governance rules under the Local Government Act, we were required to go out to public consultation. And as part of that consultation, submissions were invited and a date was set for Council to hear those submissions on Tuesday, the 11th of August. No submissions were received as part of that process. The officer's recommendation, therefore, is that Council adopts the governance documents as listed in the recommendation, publishes these documents to its website for public information, and commences the process to amend the local law number 1 to remove provisions relating to meeting procedures. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cathy. I'll now open that up to a councillor, please, willing to move that motion, move a motion on the recommendation. Looking for hands. Thank you, Councillor Clark, and seconded, I think it was Councillor Vance there. Councillor Clark, did you wish to speak to this or? No, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Apologies, I'm just trying to organise some children to cook dinner at the same time in the house. It's not working quite as well as I thought it would. As you can see, one of them's just arrived right now. Look, I think these are just important documents that we have as council. I think it's good that they're publicly available, and yes, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Vance?
I'd like to commend the staff for getting this policy together. It's my understanding that right across Victoria, councils are scrambling to get all this paperwork done in such a short time frame. So to think that we've measured up, I believe, is credit to our staff. So well done, staff. That's all. Thank you.
Well said, Councillor Vance. That's correct. Other councillors that wish to mention anything? Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to congratulate Councillor Clark on inducting his children into the council matters as early as he's doing. Thank you.
That's going to go to minutes. Yeah, absolutely. That was well said too. But it is a time where it might be a nice time to acknowledge all those parents out there who are working from home and sitting in meetings from home. We're definitely sitting with you on that. But in light of that, if there's nothing more, no comments on that item, we will put that to the vote. So all those in favour, and that's carried. Thank you. And Kathy, you have done such a good job. You've had so many similar reports tonight and a lot of work that's gone into all of them. So we thank you. And you're not off the hook yet, because the next item, 13.9, is the 2020 statutory meeting, the change of that meeting date. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is for Council to resolve on a change of date for the 2020 statutory meeting. A schedule of meetings for 2020 was adopted by Council in December 2019, and the schedule did include provision of the annual statutory meeting in October 2020 without a date being specified. Uncertainty around the timing of the 2020 Victorian Local Government General Election declarations prevented a firm date being set. Clarification has now been received around scheduled declarations of the election outcomes, with the declaration date being set at Friday the 13th of November. Perhaps an omen there, Friday the 13th. Statutory meetings to enable elected councillors to take the oath or affirmation of office must not be held until after that date. And councillors cannot act in their elected positions until they have taken the oath or affirmation of office. So Council's adopted 2020 schedule of meeting did provide for an ordinary meeting of Council to be held on Tuesday the 17th of November. And this is the first Tuesday following the declaration date of the 13th. It is therefore requested that Council resolve to schedule the 2020 statutory meeting of the Pyrenees Shire Council for 6 p.m. on Tuesday the 17th of November at the Lexington Community Centre, and then reschedule the November ordinary meeting to 6 p.m. on the following Tuesday, the 24th of November.
Thank you so much again, Ms Bramwell. I will open that up to a councillor, please, willing to move that recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Eason, and thank you, seconded Councillor Ferrari. Councillor Eason or other councillors, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just one minor point. The November meeting is usually held in Avoca, not in Beaufort. I'm wondering if there's a reason why we're transferring it from Avoca to Beaufort.
There wasn't any particular reason. I think that was mainly because of the many options that we had available, and it just defaulted back to Beaufort. We can move it to Avoca if you prefer, if that's what Council resolves.
Happy to hear from other councillors on it.
I'll open the floor there for discussion. Yes, Councillor Vance and then Councillor Clark.
Yeah, well, I'm quite happy to go along with what's traditionally happened. We only have the two meetings annually in Avoca, so I guess why change that?
Beautiful. Councillor Clark.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I concur. I think we do have the meetings on a regular basis, so I think we should continue that.
Thank you. Councillor Ferrari's nodding, and I'm very happy with that arrangement too. So I think we're all unanimously agreeing that Kathy, if we could amend, if the mover is happy to amend that to Avoca, which was used, wasn't it, Councillor Eason, and the second is happy, we'll then vote on that. So all those in favour of those dates and places of meeting, raise your hand, and that's carried. Thank you. And it is nice to keep that, for us to be able to get around the Shire a bit more and be there more present for our residents. We're now up to item 13.10. Oh, sorry, yes, Councillor Eason.
Madam Mayor, that's subject to all the COVID-19 issues that may interfere with those matters.
Very, very poignant. Thank you, Councillor Eason, for noting that. So that will be subject to the conditions then. So item 13.10 is the Reconciliation Action Plan, an update on the plan and also the acknowledgement of country. And I will hand over again to Ms. Kathy Bramwell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report was to provide an update on the progress of the Reconciliation Action Plan and provide Council with a preferred acknowledgement of country. Council adopted the Reflect Reconciliation Action Plan in February 2019, and an update of that has been provided as part of this report. Subsequent discussions have indicated by councillors that more work is needed relating to the acknowledgement of country to make this work for Council. So although there is an officer recommendation included in this report, I now hand this over to councillors for further.
Thank you. So I will now open the floor on that. Councillor Eason, would you like to speak?
Madam Mayor, I think there's further discussion required on this motion, and I would move that we place it on the table.
Thank you. That being a formal motion to place it on the table and not consider it at this council meeting doesn't need a seconder, so I will put that to the vote if everyone is happy with that. Those in favour of that formal motion, and that is carried. So thank you for that, and we'll look at that at a later date. That brings us to item 13.11, which is the Australia Day for 2021 and 2022. And I'm guessing when our CEO Jim speaks to this, that again, that will be subject to COVID restrictions and where we are at that stage. But I will now hand over, please, to Mr. Jim Nolan. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. There's a report before you that provides an opportunity for Council to determine where it wishes to have the Australia Day ceremony for 2021 and 2022. It is customary by Council to invite expressions of interest from community organisations to host this event each year as a formal celebration within the Pyrenees Shire. Council invited expressions of interest and has received 2 expressions of interest, one from the Trawalla Recreation Reserve Committee and one from the Avoca Country Women's Association. Having considered the matter in a briefing discussion, the recommendation is that Council endorses the hosting of the Australia Day for 2021 by the Trawalla Hall and Recreation Committee at Trawalla. And 2, Council seeks further expressions of interest from community organisations for hosting of the Australia Day event for 2022 and beyond.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Nolan. May I have a councillor willing to move that recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Clark. Seconded, Councillor Ferrari. Councillor Clark, would you like to speak to that item?
Madam Mayor, thank you. Definitely, I think all councillors would support strongly Trawalla. We haven't been to Trawalla for many years for an Australia Day celebration, but having recently been to Avoca, I think it is appropriate that we actually just take stock in the new year after our next Australia Day event and put in place a new process that actually engages a bit more with our towns to get them back in a bit of a schedule and get most of our towns engaged. Thank you.
Thank you. There are wise words there. Councillor Ferrari, would you like to speak to that as well?
No, just endorse the words of Councillor Clark.
Thank you. Other councillors? No, that being the case, all those in favour of the motion there, and I can see all hands, so that's carried. Thank you very much. That now brings us to our councillor reports, and I am simply going to go to the person on the top of my screen, which is Councillor Eason. So would you be happy to be my first victim to report on the beautiful area of Avoca? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's a pleasure being number one victim, as usual. Not a lot going on around the Avoca area of late. U3A group held their AGM, another one of those smaller groups within our communities that we all rely on for entertainment or services or whatever. But they're an integral part of our community, integral parts of everyone's community, are some of these groups. And U3A probably provide an education base towards their organisation, which helps elderly people in the most case, and they get a lot of enjoyment out of joining and participating. Another organisation that I'm involved with, which is the Maryborough District Health Society, has had their CEO leave and move on. And in the past, Avoca has had some issues with Maryborough District Health, but the CEO in the current circumstance, Terry Welsh, has proved to be very supportive of both Avoca and Denali, which are external campuses from the Maryborough site. He's gone a long way to improve Maryborough's support of the Avoca community. He will be sadly missed, and as one of the medical organisations within our Pyrenees Shire, we need, firstly, I would think, if possible, to send him a thank you for his support of the Avoca community and a wishing of well in his movement to Mildura. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
My apologies, I was muted and we used our hand signal then. That was very good. I think that's very well said. Thank you, Councillor Eason. And I think if everyone will be in agreement that we'd love to send a thank you letter and thank you for that work that does that ripple effect that supports all those communities around that area. We're very thankful, and it's such a wonderful source to have that hospital there as well as our own wonderful health services. I'll now go down the screen, please, to Councillor Vance and to hear from the Decameron Ward.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On Thursday the 13th, I had a Zoom meeting with the Timber Towns group. Matters of interest from that meeting, probably one of the major ones is the Wellington Shire, along with member groups of the timber industry, have formed a task force to question the decision made by the Premier in November 2019 on the closing of the native forests for harvesting. And this decision by the government is having a very detrimental effect on Gippsland. As we understand, a lot of our hardwood timbers are harvested out of the mountains in East Gippsland and the central area there, and pressure is growing at a great rate to get the Premier to go back and revisit his decision and possibly make some changes, because the worth of timber in building homes is not to be underestimated, you know, and if we're going to sacrifice all that industry at the expense of Southeast Asia, which will be replacing the timber, we're going to be importing that timber to carry on building at a massive rate like we see around Melbourne. Well, it's certainly worth revisiting the decision that has been made. it all revolves around jobs, 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 and the losses because of that government policy. So the social media and this task force are gearing themselves up to really make a big point out of this. The other point to come out of that meeting was that East Gippsland, which was so seriously hit with the bushfires back at the close of last year and early this year, the Grocon group have been cleaning up after the bushfires, and we were assured that East Gippsland is now 90% cleaned up, ready for homes to start rebuilding. Obviously a major task ahead of those people, but we wish them well. And then on Friday the 14th, I had the Rural Councils meeting. We had an address from Dench McLean, who have been doing some work for us in the advocacy area, and it's obvious that we need a coordinated effort between the city and the rural now to get everything flowing after COVID is in the history books. I'm not sure how far away it is, but it's very obvious that people have learnt to work from home. As we can see tonight, we're having council meetings sitting in our dining rooms or wherever we may be. So it is possible to do it, and there's a keen drive from Rural Councils Victoria for some of these city-based businesses to look at relocating themselves into the rural areas. There's plenty of factories in Melbourne that can be duplicated in Beaufort or Avoca, or certainly it's happening around Ballarat a little bit, but now is the time to go and advocate to the government that we might see some opportunities to relocate some of these people, and identifying them as the big problem. So Rural Councils Victoria are probably still looking at investing some more money in there to see how we can see who's in the phone book that might be keen to come and relocate to the area. The other issue is very obvious, that the aged care situation in Victoria needs some upgrading, and there's plenty of opportunity probably for places like Beaufort and Avoca to establish some aged care units that can accommodate people that are happy to move out of Melbourne. We had an address from Jerry Smith from Local Government Victoria, and it's pretty obvious, as was stated earlier tonight, that local government, especially the small rural councils, are really scrambling to get all this paperwork that we're obligated to come up with, especially in public transparency. That's one that is a real problem for most of the smaller councils. Just don't have the workforce in our staff to be able to put all this paperwork together, and when it's got to be done in a short time frame, it's placing a lot of pressure to bear on the smaller councils. Council elections were discussed, and whether or not there'd be a delay, but everybody was unanimous in the board that delaying council elections was fruitless, because it adds just so many extra costs here, there and everywhere, and the investment that's already been made in leasing out buildings to the VEC it just won't happen that the council elections are going to be put off. In our advocacy group, the chair and the deputy chair along with our advocates have met with Minister Symes, Pakula and Pulford, and they're seeking a meeting with the Minister Colbeck, the federal member for aged care, to promote the opportunities for rural Victoria. There was discussion around hitting Minister Pakula as hard as possible to promote rural tourism. It's obvious with the border closures that we're not allowed to go to New South Wales or Queensland, as many Victorians used to head off for the winter. So there's a real push to get some funding to help the operators that run our caravan parks and entertainment areas to get some assistance to try and encourage people to come up and visit us. The cross-border issues were also discussed, and I heard an announcement today on the radio this evening that a lot of the cross-border issues, especially relating around agriculture and education, on the border, close to the border, are now being removed, and community shearers will be able to go into New South Wales and do their shearing. The fruit pickers will be able to cross over without having to go fly all the way to Sydney to come back to Holbrook or somewhere like that, which was just a crazy situation. So that's good to see, but we never need we must never take our eye off the COVID situation. We must be fully aware it's still out there. It hasn't gone away yet. And soon to be released is the Population Attraction and Retention Toolkit. And just a message from Rural Councils Victoria, these toolkits need promotion, not shelves. So when they arrive in the council chambers, let's have staff have a good look through them and see if we can make something out of it. That was about my lot. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. It was very comprehensive. Thank you. Over to Councillor Ferrari. Thank you. And what's happening in Beaufort?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Like everyone, difficult to have meetings during these times, and some of the organisations just haven't got the ability to do virtual meetings, so there'll be a bit of catch up to do. But usual meetings, and had a pleasant meeting up at the Beaufort Golf Club with the stakeholders and with Charla Pulford, where there is an announcement in relation to the water recycle treatment project. So that's really exciting, and I know it's going to take a little while to come to fruition and get into place, but I'll be very, very pleased, and so I think everyone in Beaufort will be very, very pleased when that first bit of water goes through the pipe. So that's a really exciting project. Had some discussions with Friends of the Lake in relation to the Foreshore project. That's still ongoing. Had some conversations with the Beaufort Bowling Club in relation to their application for a new bowling green, a synthetic bowling green. That's still ongoing, and just a few general phone calls. And I just think I'd like to say before I finish up that I think we're going to have a bit of catching up to do across the municipality when we get the opportunity to hold actual meetings, whenever that may be. And I think it's really important we do that to gauge how some of those committees and organisations have fared through the pandemic times, because some of them will be struggling quite significantly, and we need to be able to gauge that. And if we can provide some support in some way or some opportunities to help them, we need to know that early and be proactive in making sure those committees, because they're so important to the communities, and especially those little communities, they're very, very important. So we just need to do some proactive work after the pandemic to see how they're travelling. Thank you.
Absolutely, that's so true, and we'll be very keen when we're able to do that. Thank you, Councillor Ferrari. Councillor Clark, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Like most, now we've moved back into restrictions. It's been the key council events and a few constituent matters here and there that I've been doing, but the backdrop to that, I think, is across most of the Shire, is we're actually having an amazing season, and that just, it's a bit of a spring in everybody's step, which is a really, really nice thing. It's been very good to see the work being done on the drought relief boards in my patch, which is at Waterloo, of course, and just at Glenbrae, where we are, just south of Lexington. And I think the other thing also to make comment on is that certainly the community grants in my patch have been very well received by the recipient groups. Thank you very much to council. It's a shame that the football season finished quickly, but it has been actually quite good to have a bit of AFL to watch as a pleasant relief and those kind of things. And that's probably my lot, I think, for the moment, Madam Mayor.
Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to hear around the... Oh, sorry, Councillor Vance, yes?
Sorry, Madam Mayor. One issue that I did miss that I'd like to congratulate our outdoor staff on the excellent work they're doing on the back roads now. It's nice to be able to drive up some of those lesser known roads without getting bounced off the road through the corrugation. So well done to the outdoor staff. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. And I thank you, Councillor Vance. I won't repeat a lot of the information about COVID and impact on going forward on businesses and things like that, but that certainly has been the topic of conversation in meeting with the MPs we have over the last couple of weeks. We've met Jim and I have met with Dan Teen, and I've met with Anne Webster, and we've met with Andy Medic, and even at our MAV Mayor's meeting a couple of weeks ago, COVID sort of puts everything else into the pale, because again, it is our utmost focus at the moment to make sure we are protecting our residents and looking at bouncing back in our tourism and our business sectors to be able to support those people. And it's an exciting, of course, last meeting talking about our economic task force and looking at how we can best support people. And though that task force, having already met now, looks like it will act very positively in supporting our community. One thing, it has been a very good season too, of course, down in the south farming wise, although Councillor Clark, I would say it just makes the lambs heavier to put into the lamb's cradle when you're marking and giving them their necessary injections, but it is a wonderful thing, and it is a very hope-filling message, I think, for our agricultural industry, and then agricultural industry, of course, being able to support everyone else who still needs to eat, and I think that we're very blessed that I think now, with again referring back to Councillor Vance, sensible decisions that have been made about border access, etc., for agriculture particularly, to be able to meet those needs and support our communities across the nation, are very important. One thing I do want to speak on a more day-to-day basis, our transfer stations, of course, will be changing from tickets to using notices, and we'll be getting more information out there. So that's one thing that has been a little bit topical, but that should make the ease of using our transfer stations for those that need to across our area at least, make it a lot more user-friendly. And hopefully still will encourage a lot of that great recycling and all that we've been seeing across our communities. And we thank you, all of you out there who are doing that, and we'll continue to do that to look after and protect our environment and to be really responsible. I do congratulate again, so heartened to see and hearing from other parents, and Councillor Clark will hear me in this, in that moving back into schooling from home or schooling in different forms, our teachers and schools have just been amazing again to move into that and to give that support. And I think there's more of a positive view on it now, because people are getting that support and it is out there. So, but I do want to send out a big, we're thinking of you to those parents who again are juggling work, and they're juggling looking after and caring for their children, and not just their children's educational needs, but their mental and emotional needs even more so, when they're not being able to hang out with their mates and those sorts of things. So we are all in this together, and we will get through it together, but it is a trying time. In amongst that trying time of COVID, even just in our area, there has been so many heartening things, and we've had community groups getting together to pick up rubbish in areas. We've had a few instances of that now. I've had so many individual and group shout outs to elderly members and vulnerable members. Again, it hasn't ceased, and that's what's so beautiful about this. It's an ongoing support and even greater support mechanisms for people within our communities. I think it's a blessing of being part of such strong knit local communities. So a huge thank you to all of you that are looking out not only for yourselves and protecting others through protecting yourself, but really thinking of those vulnerable people. A shout out to our council staff who are going above and beyond their duties to seek out any vulnerable people that may not be on our system, that may need that support. There's many staff members that are really going above and beyond that, and we thank you for that as well. So I think that we do have exciting things happening in Snake Valley too, with the skate park looking to commence the building of that very shortly. The barbecue shelter has already had a do-over, and that's just been so inspiring for the community, and people are very excited about those things. So I think in amongst still a very trying time, and we thank you all again, public who are listening tonight, and please spread the word. We thank you for your diligence and your vigilance in wearing masks when you're out in public and really maintaining that social distancing. And it does get harder the longer this continues, but hopefully the more vigilant we can be, this will be a shorter time and we'll be back to as normal as we can as soon as we can. So I'd like to just end on that, a huge thank you, and also just a little thank you tonight. We have one of our IT people, Sean Elliott, who's put this together and is looking after us to make sure this goes well. This is a little bit of a significant event. This is the first time the Pyrenees Shire Council has ever had a fully Zoom meeting. So part of history making, but hopefully a time that we'll look back upon, not have to continue with very much into the future. So that's all from me. If nobody had anything else that they'd thought of or wanted to shout out, I will then thank all the officers and all the councillors. I thank you all for listening this evening and for, again, being positive members. And as our media and comms, Kate Depler, keeps reminding us all, hashtag Pyrenees Community Can, and we will, and we thank you. And on that note, I will close the meeting at 7:29. So thank you very much this evening, and this will also be accessible on the website post this meeting. So thank you again, and good night to everyone.